Hi guys, Mat Coch from speedcafe.com. I'm lucky enough to be joined by Eugene, Arocca, CEO of Motorsport Australia, to get a bit of an update on where things are at in terms of the current situation with motorsport in this country. Eugene, good to be joined by you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Matt. I really appreciate it.
So off the bat, let's talk about where is motorsport at the moment. What can we do? What can't we do? What's the current state of play?
Well, as of today, I think it's fair to say that the social distancing restrictions and the restrictions on public gatherings are such that we're not aware of any large-scale motorsport happening anywhere in the country. We know that specific states have actually said no motorsport activity. We understand that Tailem Bend is conducting some very limited drive days, very limited numbers, 5 to 10 people. But it's fair to say that right now motorsport is in hibernation.
And based on the information that you have, when can we expect that motorsport will resume? Because it looks as though Europe is now talking about July, August. Formula One said that in recent days. What about Australia? Where do we stand, do you know?
Well, Australia's a bit complicated because we've got 6 different states or territories that seem to be not necessarily consistent with their approach. We know that Queensland and WA are looking to start to reduce the social restrictions in the next week or so. In fact, some have already started, whereas Victoria has made it clear that they're not doing anything until the 11th of May. So right now we're keeping a watching brief on every state, but my personal view is that we can expect some sort of low-level club activities by possibly the end of May, early June. It'll be a tentative re-engagement at the lowest level where the numbers are fairly minimal. And I think that it will then gradually build up, hopefully, to some activity in June or July at the higher level. By that I mean state level and probably even national level.
Has Motorsport Australia or yourself in particular had discussions with state or federal government to get an update? And what sort of bodies do you speak to if that is the case?
Yeah, well, we're communicating with all of the health officers around the country. So we've been pretty proactive from day one in engaging with them to find out where their positioning is, and quite bluntly, their response at the moment is it's really much of a wait and see. We're making submissions to nearly every state and certainly the federal government in the next couple of weeks around what we believe Motorsport Australia can offer to accelerate any potential return to motorsport at the lower levels, building up to the national level. So I know that supercars have also been in discussions with various state bodies. So for us, it's really continuing to engage, review what is being put out by the relevant sports ministers, which is almost every 2 or 3 days, a sports minister is putting something out.
So for motorsport to resume, we need government sign-off, and I presume that means state government, because there are so many different states here. It's not a federal government sign-off, it's each individual state signing off on their own particular branch of that.
Yeah, unless there's an event that can run under the declared minimum public gathering numbers, and at the moment there's less than 10 in some states. Most are just talking about no more public gatherings of 2 people at a time. So I suspect personally that there'll be a gradual loosening of 2 to 10 to 50 to 100. That will allow us to introduce some lower level activities, carnicrosses, even some specific rally events, where we can look at introducing activities at that level just to see how they operate, but at the same time backing them up with some amendments to our current practices to be able to accommodate both the government restrictions and what we believe to be responsible from our sport to avoid an outbreak or the risk of an outbreak.
One thing that's come in the last 10 or so years has been the advent of these LED panels that are used sometimes in collaboration with a flag marshal, other times independently. Is that something that could be used more, or even used as a replacement for officials to get motorsport running more quickly?
Certainly something that is valuable, but all the indications I've got from the people who know better is that you still need individuals stationed around the track to be able to offer assistance in the event that there's a mishap. And that's an inevitable reality of motorsport, that there are incidents and that they can be spread around the circuit. And there's no substitute for a quick response by an individual stationed at a particular location with or without the lights. And what you'll find is even when there are lights, they're more for warning drivers as opposed to providing the sort of on-the-ground, immediate response that's required in motorsport. So it's a bit of a balance. I certainly think that the LED lights have got a role to play in helping to avoid further incidents when there has been an incident, but they're no substitute for the necessity of having people on the ground immediately jumping a fence, getting through a space and getting to a particular driver or competitor to render assistance and offer medical and other advice. And so I still think that there's a balance and we're not quite there yet.
We've spoken about Motorsport Australia, I guess, representing the sport with government and working on ways to get the sport going again. What can Motorsport Australia do elsewhere with its members to help support the industry? Because there are families, individuals, businesses that rely on motorsport at the moment. I guess they're hurting.
You've got to remember that motorsport relies upon medical experts and medical assistants and first responders, and they're quite frankly needed at the moment on the front line in dealing with COVID-19. So that's an added layer of caution for us as a sport that right now more people are being used to combat COVID-19 around the country in a medical sense. And for us to put on, and I know that from the very start, our own medical people were very conscious that positioning people at a venue for a community sport at the loss of using those people in hospitals and other clinics was a concern. We are not in a financial position to be able to really offer assistance to any of those various industries that rely upon motorsport. Our main obligation is to get the motorsport activities going as quickly as possible. We see our most significant role in providing lobbying and advice and assistance to government to get the sport going again as soon as possible. And look, the sport has been quiet since about, we can take the Grand Prix as being the date when the sport almost shut down on the spot. There were some activities and events that continued into late March, even early April. But for all intents and purposes, we've been conscious of the fact that government has expected that we do not participate in motorsport at a large level, and we're respecting that, but working on how we can get going as soon as possible.
How immune is Motorsport Australia? Can it weather this storm for a long period of time? I know that it's got a reasonable balance sheet from the most recent report that I've seen.
We do have money in the bank. It's generally available in our financials, but it ranges between $1 to $2 million. We can weather the storm. The fact that our staff have been prepared and willing to reduce their salaries or reduce their hours to accommodate. The reality right now, Matt, is that our revenue is basically 5% of what it was 3 months ago. And we've got understanding sponsors, we've got understanding category managers and event promoters, and everyone's sort of in this holding pattern. But if we have to weather this for 12 months, we can and we will, because we'll simply adjust our expense and our costs accordingly. We do not intend to come out the other end laden with debt and in a position where we are actually hamstrung from operating the way we have in the past. But at the same time, we want to review how we've operated, be more efficient, consider the way in which we've done things in the past. We've set up working parties. We've got a recovery task force. It's made up of both internal and external people to look at not just the way in which we operate, but the way in which the sport operates.
Does Motorsport Australia receive any sort of injection or assistance from state or federal governments? Is that an income source for yourselves?
In any given year, we receive between $700,000 to $900,000 a year in government grants, normally tied to specific programs, of which we have a number. We've been able to talk to all of our government partners, and the general mood has been that any grant monies that have been paid to date will remain basically accounted for on the basis that we may not deliver the program for another 12 months. So that's a good thing. But we've also made separate representations to every state government and to the federal government for assistance as required. We've, as I've said, dialed down our costs and expenses to sort of meet the expectations of the next 6 to 12 months. But at the same time, we've been able to take advantage of JobKeeper to keep some of our salary or most of our staff paid, even if it's less than what they were getting full time. But we're certainly looking at both the FIA and local government for selected grants where possible. But with every grant, there needs to be an expectation of delivering something, or perhaps if it's a loan, we'll have to repay it. So our expectation is that no one's getting anything for nothing. You'll see that government wasn't prepared to bail out Virgin. I don't think there's a lot of money to go around generally, and so we have to manage our own affairs. But any money we can pick up along the way, whether it's prepayment of state grants, federal money, and we're certainly happy to be accountable for that, but also manage it responsibly. But we factored in that we can continue on pretty much as the status quo without much assistance at the moment.
You mentioned there that there's been a lot of pressure on the government with, doing initiatives like the JobKeeper thing and refusing to bail out Virgin and other pressures on, I guess, the government budget. Are those grants that Motorsport Australia is receiving, are they going to be as easy to get next time you go looking?
I don't really know the answer to that, other than thus far, the government, every government minister I've spoken to, every state or federal government is terribly sympathetic to all sports, and there seems to be an unstated commitment that they will continue to support sport into the future, particularly through the next 12 to 18 months when most of us are not going to be able to simply return to norm. But at the same time, I think they'll expect that we will show some improvements in efficiencies and the way in which we operate to justify that faith. So I don't get a sense that money is going to simply dry up. I do get a sense that they'll expect us to continue to act responsibly as we have to date. I'm pretty confident, particularly in this state, in Victoria and New South Wales, that there won't be a turning off of the tap, but there will be a continuing expectation of accountability before we get money.
I guess the sport runs on money. That's a universal constant no matter where you go, not just here in Australia. But fundamentally in Australia, what we don't realise, we look at supercars and the Motorsport Australia Championships, the top end of town, but you don't look at the grassroots so much. And that's where there's a lot of discretionary spend from individuals to go and follow their passion. With the economic being hit as it is, how do you see motorsport restarting? Is it going to come back with a bang? Is it going to come back with a whimper? How do you encourage people to get their cars out of the shed?
Without knowing how long this crisis will continue, and we know that there's talk about unemployment of up to 10, 12, 13, 15%. And like most sports, we're a disposable income sport. What's unmistakable is that people own cars and they like to go racing. And I think there'll be a sort of staged, responsible return to motorsport, but it will probably take 12 to 18 months. I can't imagine that everyone will simply rush out and get into their cars the first day of any opportunity. I think people will sit back and clean up what is inevitably going to be a consequence of the last 3 months and the next 3 to 6 or 9 months. And we just can't guess how that's going to impact people. There's the challenge of crowd numbers. There's the challenge of spectators. There's the challenge of finance and money and petrol. We ain't going to have the same low levels of petrol cost in 6 months or 9 months when things get going. So we're just watching it and getting feedback and listening to our members as much as we can. But I think, Matt, the reality is going to be that we're not going to return to 27,500 licensed competitors, which is a record, next month. We are going to be slowly building back up to that over a period. The flip side, of course, is that with eSports, with some of the other projects we've got online that we're looking at rolling out, we hope to continue to have growing interest in motorsport so that when people are able to get back, the sell is going to be much easier. It'll just be around giving them the opportunity rather than trying to re-educate them. So I'm confident that there'll be a demand. It's just a question of how much and when. You
mentioned eSports there, and that was something I wanted to ask you about because there is a huge prevalence of it at the moment. Obviously, supercars and ARG are running their own competitions. There's countless others not necessarily affiliated with a category out there, just standalone competitions being run by a group of mates or whatever. Is eSports a positive or a negative for a body like Motorsport Australia?
We've always seen it as a positive. We've always recognised that motorsport is one of those sports that lends itself very well to eSports, as has been illustrated by the events that have been televised online so far. Have almost had record numbers. Now, we've got a bit of a captive audience. There is nothing that replaces the thrill and the excitement of getting in a car if you're a true motorsport aficionado. The challenge for us is to try and migrate as many people who get excited out of watching an esport or participating in esport and getting them into a car. And it's a relatively inexpensive activity at lower levels. So we see opportunity. We know the FIA has seen opportunity. The fact that they held one of their first world championships in Sydney late last year is evidence of that. So we see esports as an opportunity, but never a substitute for the real thing. But certainly esports has opened up sponsor opportunities, has opened up engagement opportunities. We see an opportunity where we can have an e-license migrate across to a real license. So we're looking at all those opportunities, but we certainly don't believe it's going to diminish the importance of on-the-ground, everyday motorsport activity. Australians love their motorsport. I don't think that's going to change.
Does the current environment lend itself to the formation of a Motorsport Australia iRacing Champion or something like a dedicated Motorsport Australia endorsed competition ongoing, like we have with, I guess, the Touring Car Championship, for example?
I think it does. Unfortunately, there's probably a little bit of competition in the market. There's obviously the supercars that have got their own bespoke product. I know that TCR have done the same. We certainly believe there's an opportunity for more generic motorsports fans to be involved. So we've certainly done in the past during the Shannon's rounds. We've had e-championships. We certainly intend to roll that out more and more. But again, there's no substitute for the real thing. And what drives our sport are events. What drives our numbers are licensed competitors going to events. There's a balance, but we certainly will not take our eye off the bigger picture, which is getting more people in more cars. And in a time when autonomous vehicles, electric cars, and all that sort of stuff will be on the horizon, there is no substitute for getting in your own car and competing and having fun in an exciting and thrilling sport. One that gives more thrills and spills than many other sports. And so from my point of view, we will not discount the importance of esports and the possibility of our own championship. But our major product is the 99.5% amateur sports people that go out and compete every week, up to 1,000 events a year, 27,500 licensed competitors. They're the heartbeat of our sport, and that's who we intend to continue working with.
And of those, I'm mostly familiar with the circuit racing side of things, but there's a huge amount of work that Motorsport Australia does with the Australian Rally Championship, the Australian Off-Road Championship, all of that side of things. Where is that up to? I know the Motorsport Australia Championships, the Shannon's Motorsport Australia Championships are on hold a little bit at the moment. Where's the Australian Rally Championship up to, and where's the Australian Off-Road Championship up to? They're
both on hold, and I must say that in the last 2 or 3 years, both of those championships have gained some increases in both eyeballs and in popularity. Our expectation is that at the moment, both of them had pegged in either 6 or 5 rounds. The reality is that we're probably going to be able to get away with somewhere between 3 and 4 rounds if motorsport gets going again. I can tell you that the competitors are very keen. They're all waiting for the checkered flag to drop. But we've been working behind the scenes on how they can come back to life when the opportunity arises. So again, the answer to your question is a bit vague in saying that we hope and expect that we'll be able to run those rounds, including the side-by-side championship, which is another popular little activity. But it does depend upon our capacity to work within the social distancing and public gathering rules. And as we speak, we're getting people to work through the rules and regs that could accommodate that for all sports and all disciplines.
Is there concern around some of these commercial teams that rely on the corporate money coming in to maintain their staff and their workshop and everything else? Is there concern there that some of these might fall over and that then leaves us exposed at particularly the top end? I spoke to David Wall, and I know they've got enough work to go on for the next little bit, but there are some others out there that perhaps don't have that work and don't have that income at the moment.
Can't answer for other entities, but we've experienced our own situation with some 9 or 10 sponsors. Some have paid when they didn't need to. Others have asked for time, but all of them overwhelmingly have indicated they intend to stick around, primarily because there's a level of confidence that when things get going again, because of the way we've managed this crisis in Australia, there's a confidence that when things get going, it's not going to be as bleak as it otherwise would be. But I do think it'll need some real understanding by both parties, both the sponsors and TV promoters, with TV suppliers, with TV production companies, and the categories, just to make sure that we don't ruin our opportunities by being inflexible. So what I'm getting is, let's communicate, let's work together, let's understand that there's a longer term need to keep the sport sustainable, and let's make adjustments. I'm not a pessimist. I'm optimistic about our ability to bounce back and motorsport's ability to capture the support that it's always enjoyed in the past, because we are a TV sport. And whilst we are a TV sport that has been able to take other opportunities online, I think that there'll still be a demand for our sport to be supported by corporate Australia.
Will motorsport be one of the first sports to resume, do you think, given that, as you say, we are a TV sport, we don't have 40,000 people crammed into the MCG, for instance?
I think we will definitely get an advantage in that, because in my discussions with supercars, the discussions have been around the fact that we can compete without necessarily having a crowd. That presents its own challenges if you're looking at street circuits, because there's an investment in infrastructure that is based on crowds. But I've got absolute confidence that we're one of those sports that is able to respond fairly quickly and doesn't need a crowd to be able to still be on television. There's something really eerie about watching a football game when their stands are empty, and when so much relies upon crowd interaction. Kick a goal, you get the celebrations and all that sort of stuff. Motorsport's a different beast, and I don't think we rely or necessarily feed off crowd interaction to have an exciting race. It's good to see people in the stands, absolutely need those, but I could imagine Bathurst would be just as exciting without a crowd in October 2020 as it would be in October 2019. So I think it's a really good observation, Matt. I think it positions us very well to be able to respond pretty quickly when sport gets going without the need for crowds in the immediate future.
Wrapping up, I guess, what's your very short sound grab synopsis on where Motorsport Australia is and how it's looking in, I guess, the short to medium term?
Well, the synopsis is that Motorsport Australia is managing itself responsibly in a time when everyone is having to make adjustments, and we're ready and expecting to be able to dial up as soon as the motorsport industry is able to go racing again, from the lowest levels at grassroots up to supercars and F1. So we've got a wonderful staff and executive who have been able to work and behind the scenes in readiness for the inevitable return of motorsport. As I often say, motorsport's in our DNA. We are a sport that's going to be here in 50 years' time, 100 years' time, and we're certainly very proud of our association and very confident that when the opportunity arises, we'll get going as quickly as we possibly can.
Eugene, thanks for your time. Good to speak as always.
Matt, good to see you. Thanks again for your support. Thanks for Speed Cafe's support. We really value that. It's the major platform for getting news out there in motorsport. And so we're looking forward to awakening and getting things rolling as quickly as possible. And again, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you.